Well, hey, everybody. Well, let's talk about one of the more fascinating synoptic problems in the synoptic gospels. And it has to do with Mark chapter 9. There's a story of a dad and a boy who is, they say, demon possessed. He's having seizures. It says that he's being thrown into the fire, then into the water, and all that kind of stuff. And the father says to Jesus, he says, I asked your disciples to heal my son, and they couldn't. And so later on in the story, after Jesus heals the boy, the disciples ask, why couldn't we do it? And he says, well, this kind only comes out by prayer. In the Gospel of Mark, he says that. Where the synoptic problem becomes kind of interesting is that when you look to the book of Matthew and look to the book of Luke, normally what goes on, if we're going to say that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source, like the Q theory says, normally what we would see is that Mark would be like a source and that Matthew and Luke would then expound upon that, either based upon their own sources or knowing the story a little bit differently or whatever. But in this case, we don't have that. In this case, what we have is we have Matthew and Luke telling a shorter version of the story, not utilizing all of what Mark is writing down. In fact, we have one of the most fascinating issues that goes on in textual criticism. We have Mark saying that Jesus says this one only comes out by prayer. And in Matthew, we have that being redacted. That's gone in the earliest manuscripts. In Luke, it's not there either. And so I find it fascinating to think that if they didn't have Q, if what like Mark Goodacre says is true, is that Luke is using Matthew, this is one of those places where it seems pretty obvious that Luke has a copy of Matthew in front of him and says, no, we're going to go with this one, and not with Mark's take on it. What is more fascinating than any of it, though, is that this is one of those instances that we can see in our newer translations that one of the verse that says this one only comes out by prayer in Matthew is taken out and is footnoted. And the reason is because it's not there in the earliest manuscripts, but as we look at manuscript tradition, it slowly but surely gets scribally added into Matthew. And it's likely that the scribe added it because he knew the story and he was like, hey, there's something missing here. And he knew Mark, and so he's adding that in there. But when we look back at the earliest ones, it's not there. So this is one of those kind of interesting issues. And so it's one of the most fascinating ones of synoptic problem because Mark has more than Luke or Matthew.